Hello and welcome. India's economy seems to be recovering from the ill effects of demonetization with a strong remonetization move. The question is, which are the new pressure points that are building up both domestically and internationally? And as most economists have been saying, some of the international pressure points, including on the trade front, could be far more damaging in some ways to the economy than perhaps the domestic ones that we've been talking about. Let me discuss that a little more with Jahangir Aziz, Head Emerging Market Economic Research at JP Morgan. Jahangir, thank you very much for speaking with us. So let me get a broad outlook from you as we stand or sit in the sort of early part of 2017. How do things look?
We had a pretty decent run starting somewhere back in 2016, just after the G20's Shanghai meetings. And what we saw during that period of time is that we saw emerging markets, broadly speaking, emerging market asset class, in fact, across all asset classes, actually outperforming developed market. Now, if you go back to over 15, 20 years, the critical driver of whether emerging market assets are outperforming or underperforming DM assets is based on what is happening to the growth differential between emerging markets and developed markets. So it is always the case that emerging markets grow faster than developed market. But what we see is that capital flows come into emerging market if the growth differential between emerging market and developed market actually expands. And that was a situation we saw right from early 2000, right up to 2010. I'm not taking the global financial crisis years into account. And the reason turns out to be quite simple. Look, foreigners want to invest in emerging market countries, but emerging market countries are riskier. Therefore, they need something to compensate them for the risk that they're taking, and that compensation comes from higher growth. So from 2000 to about 2010, again, forgetting about the global financial crisis period, growth differential between emerging market and developed market kept on widening. Every asset class on emerging markets outperformed. Doesn't really matter what. Foreign exchange, equities, bonds, corporate bonds, sovereign credit, doesn't really matter. It outperformed. From 2010 onwards, you see the secular decline or shrinking of that growth differential, and every asset class on emerging markets underperformed DM asset class. And then we saw this pickup taking place, where growth differentials started to widen once again in favor of emerging markets. And more importantly, economists and analysts and everybody started saying that this widening would continue through the next 2-3 years, and that was the reason why we saw this entire thing, emerging markets outperforming. And then came the November elections, and the surprise result of that had two impacts. One was that immediately people started saying, okay, from now, the new fiscal world of U.S. policy would be easier fiscal policy, which resulted in the 10-year rate, U.S. Treasury rates going up. It tightened global financial conditions, and therefore emerging market capital turned into outflows, inflows turned to outflows. But more importantly, people started saying that, look, if U.S. is going to grow faster because of fiscal policy, right, then that growth differential that we had been expecting to widen may not widen. And therefore, there was genuine rethinking. And again, that is related to people's expectations about fiscal policy, what form it would take, whether it would be accompanied by trade protectionism, etc. What we've seen over the last 2-3 months is that, there is a cyclical lift taking place. DM growth is picking up, not so much in the US, but in Europe. Along with that, there is a mini tech cycle that is taking place. As a result, you're seeing exports picking up. And export pickup, we're astounded by India's export pickup last month, but it's across the board. What we have,
that comes on the heels of a almost 16 or 17-month decline.
That's right. But you're seeing export picking up for a variety of reasons in North Asia, Korea, Taiwan, China. It's much more tech-related. Singapore is much more tech-related and commodity-related. So you have commodity prices going up. You have commodity-related exports going up. A large part of our exports have been oil-related exports that's taking place. But also manufacturing has also picked up. The question is, what is it? How are we sort of, supplying that higher exports? It's essentially been a decumulation of inventories. And so, November, December, even January, exports started picking up, and it was basically supplied through running down inventories, which means that we are going to see inventories being accumulated. So IP numbers, etc., are going to turn out to look good. Well, the question is that there is no real final demand that is driving that export pickup. We aren't seeing that in any place in the world. And so usually inventory cycles don't last beyond 2-3 months. So our sense is that all of this export pickup that we're seeing across the board, not just in India, most likely may not run longer than, let's say, the second quarter of this year, largely because that's the end of the inventory accumulation cycle that will be accompanied with it.
So that's on the export front. So how are you seeing, what on the domestic front, what is your outlook?
Again, CSO 7% growth number obviously surprised everyone. For us, this.
Do you believe the number?
Look, we have had problems with the CSO numbers, not just this quarter, not just the previous quarter, not just the quarter before that. Since CSO has moved to this new methodology, it has been very difficult to reconcile CSO numbers with traditional high-frequency indicators. Now, CSO has a point that, look, they have shifted their methodology from the old methods to this new methodology, new database called MCA21, which has millions of
companies.
The problem is that we haven't seen the database. It's now been 4 years. That database hasn't been published, so we have no real way of ourselves being outside of CSO to learn what is the new methodology, what is it that we should be looking at. Instead, we are focusing and basing it on traditional indicators, and none of the traditional indicators are suggesting that growth is close to that level. So, if CSO really wants us to start believing their numbers and, saying that, those numbers are kosher, we shouldn't question those numbers, at the minimum they should release that database so that we are also familiar with the methodology. So I think there's some methodological issues. Part of the reason is that because we don't have enough information to understand that. So whether it's 7% growth or something else, it's not the question.
So
the question is what is happening to the momentum of growth.
Yeah. And what's your outlook? I mean, let's keep aside whether it's 6.5 or 7.5. So for this economy, which went through the shock of demonetization and which seems to have recovered substantially now.
Absolutely right. So we are seeing that recovery taking place in, even anecdotally we are seeing the recovery taking place. Again, as I said, is that recovery taking place because corporate investment is turning around? No. If you look at credit data. If you take out household and household-related credit, almost every other credit data in nominal terms is turning negative. It would be miraculous if, with negative credit growth, Indian corporates are actually investing. It is usually not the case. And, we have obviously many reasons as to why that's not happening. But that's nothing to do with demonetization. Yeah. I think the demonetization effect on the demand side clearly is reversing. But that was, reasonably well anticipated that it would start reversing once the liquidity came
So we are in some ways going back to the problems that existed before.
That's absolutely right. November. And probably has become worsened because of benign or non-benign neglect. I have no idea. But, the constraints coming from NPLs, et cetera, which we've been, harping since 2014, probably 13, has for a long time become binding constraints to India's growth and remains, and that constraint has become even more binding. The only thing that we are not sure of in demonetization is what is the supply side effect. Did demonetization also disrupt supply chains, and will those supply chains come back? And you and I can argue about this till the cows come home, but we won't know that till, let's say, the second half of the year. If there is a supply effect, then, the world changes quite a bit. If there isn't a supply effect, I think we will probably go back to whatever level of growth existed, and I'm not putting a number over here, prior to the demonetization. And, whatever the impact was for that on employment, et cetera, we'll probably go back to that. If there is a supply side effect, it's a different ballgame altogether.
Right. So are you seeing any kickers in the next, let's say, the rest of the year? And could that be domestic or could that be international or not?
So let's start domestic. What to us has been the one thing that people haven't focused on is that we have all sort of obsessed about central government fiscal deficit. Central government fiscal deficit has been brought down every year. It's now down to the target now is 3.2, 3.3. The problem is that at the state level, all of that consolidation that the central government has done has been completely offset. So if you add central government and state government fiscal deficit, it's been running around 7% for the last 3 years, and there's been no consolidation at all. Which means that a lot of fiscal stimulus is actually in the system. We are just not talking about it because it's central government. If you look at the state government fiscal stimulus, it is a significantly large fiscal stimulus that's in the market. And I have no sense of whether or not that will be stopped, whether they will take away the punch bowl. I don't know,
But it's the good news.
but
part,
it's
yeah.
but it's fiscally driven through very profligate state spending that is taking place. That's sort of could be a support to growth. On the other hand, I think again we are not focusing on the fact that oil prices are $50. If you look at 2014 right up to 2015 middle, where oil prices fell from over $100 to $25 a barrel, that was a massive positive terms of trade shock. Our estimates suggest we got about 2.5 to 3 percentage points of growth over those 2 years. Now it is reversing. Now it may not be very much. It's just gone from 25 to 50, but it's a 50% increase. It's a doubling of oil prices, and that necessarily has to be a negative terms of trade shock, and that negative terms of trade shock will have a negative impact. So you're between those two things. How large will be the negative shock from oil moving back up to 50, and how profligate will state governments become? On the international front, again, the question is, if you're looking at who are the big drivers of growth, U.S. isn't really driving growth. U.S. at least not so far. Maybe with the easy fiscal policy, you might get it. It's Europe that's essentially providing a lot of demand coming out there, but it's just one place. In terms of negatives on the thing front, look, we'll have to wait and see how fiscal policy for U.S. turns out. What are the details of the corporate or the proposed corporate tax cut and the proposed forms of protectionism, whether it takes a standard tariff increase or it's some version of the border adjustment tax, we don't know.
Right. So last question in a way, when you look ahead, and if you look at some of the larger challenges
Right.
facing India as a country, the challenge of jobs,
Sure.
the challenge of reskilling, how do you think we're geared today, and what are the thoughts that you have,
Sure.
and to what extent do they sync with
Right.
what
I mean,
the approach that we're taking?
Absolutely. So I think this is, again, India is not something unique. There is no Indian exceptionalism. India is just another emerging market country, and if you look at every emerging market country other than China, and I'll tell you why other than China, that all of these emerging market countries since the early 2000s saw this massive growth simply because of this rapid expansion of global trade called globalization. Since 2010, global trade has completely collapsed. Over the last, I would say, year and a half, global trade in real terms has actually turned negative. We have been addicted to exports being the driver of growth. We need to get out of the addiction. I think policies and reforms today across emerging market countries, including India, haven't really focused on trying to find out new drivers of growth. New drivers of growth. I'm not saying that trade can't be a driver of growth. Trade will be a driver of growth, but the over-reliance on trade has to be stepped back, and which means that we need to focus a bit more, maybe a lot more, on domestic demand. Moment we think about how to get domestic demand going, we run into serious challenges. Very high savings rate, and we take enormous amount of pride and solace that Indian savings rate is one of the highest in the world. But why are we saving? We are saving because we want our children to get good education. We are saving because of our old age health reasons. We are saving because we want to build a house, and we are saving because of our daughter's wedding. I mean, The last two, the government can't do very much. But on the first two, government has a huge role to play by increasingly providing publicly funded healthcare, publicly, or change or reforming the healthcare system so the cost of healthcare insurance goes down, and education. They can actually reduce precautionary savings, and a reduction in precautionary savings in India will help to boost domestic demand. But that's not the conversation we're having at this point in time. I think the conversation still remains that we somehow need to get back to the export gravy train, whether we want to be a manufacturing hub for this or manufacturing hub for that. And I think...
And you're saying the train's left the station long ago. Yeah?
I'm not saying that the train has left the station long ago. I think you should pursue with that. I mean, that's not... I mean, every country is doing it. I mean, every country wants to be a manufacturing
hub. So you'll get a
hub.
small share of that, but yeah.
Right, but the question is, why are we focusing exclusively on that? Why aren't we focusing on demand? Why aren't we saying, look, let there be a balance between the two of them? Let us be agnostic about where growth comes from, whether it's externally driven or domestically driven. What we want is to have a set of policies that gives us growth.
Right, and fundamentally, as you said, disincentivize savings, incentivize
Right.
consumption.
That's right. And that's a very bad thing to say in Asia.
But you feel that it can be done at least by focusing on
I mean, not
expenditure to do with healthcare, insurance,
and reforms. You need to also have reforms. I mean, it's not just providing healthcare and publicly providing. It has to also assuring the household, a person at the age of 40. Trying to decide how much saving that the person needs to do for the children's education and for healthcare and for housing. They need to be assured that there are limits to how much they need to put aside, not unlimited amounts.
right? Jahangir Aziz, always a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you.